April 4, 1945. Merkus, Germany. A column of Third Army vehicles rolled through the shattered streets of another liberated German town, the tracks of Sherman tanks carving fresh ruts into cobblestones that had known only horse-drawn carts for centuries. The war in Europe had entered its final weeks, and General George S. Patton's forces were slicing deep into the heart of the collapsing Reich, bypassing pockets of resistance, racing against both the Red Army to the east and the calendar itself. Lieutenant Colonel William Russell stood beside his jeep, watching as a stream of displaced persons trudged past his position. French, Polish, Russian, slave laborists freed from nearby factories, now moving like ghosts through the spring afternoon. Most looked straight ahead, hollow-eyed, focused only on the next step away from their captivity. But two French women approached his interpreter, their urgency cutting through the exhaustion that hung over the column. They spoke rapidly, hands gesturing toward the hills south of town. The interpreter's expression shifted from polite attention to sharp focus. Within minutes, Russell found himself listening to a story that seemed almost too fantastical for the chaos of the war's final act. A mine. Not just any mine, but a massive salt extraction facility that had been sealed by the SS, trucks arriving in the night. Heavy crates requiring multiple men to lift. German officers who threatened death to any worker who spoke of what they had seen. Russell had heard dozens of such rumors in the past weeks. Every town had its whispered stories of hidden gold, secret weapons, Nazi treasure buried in alpine caves. Most proved to be nothing more than desperate fantasies or local legends amplified by the Reich's collapse. But something in the women's certainty, the specific details about the Kaiserode salt mine at Merkus, made him reach for his radio. By April 6th, reconnaissance teams had confirmed unusual activity around the mine entrance. German civilians in the area spoke carefully, their fear still fresh even with American tanks parked in their streets. Yes, they admitted when pressed, something had been brought to the mine. No, they did not know what. The SS had made it very clear that curiosity about Merkus was a terminal condition. The mine itself sprawled across the hillside south of town, its entrance a stark concrete portal that plunged into the earth at an angle that suggested enormous depth. The machinery was civilian, industrial equipment for salt extraction that had operated for generations. But the guards had been military. The activity had been recent. And now, with the Wehrmacht dissolved and the SS vanished into the chaos of Germany's collapse, the mine sat silent, its secrets locked behind steel doors and 2,000 feet of vertical shaft. Patton's intelligence officers studied maps of the facility. The Kaiserode mine was old, its tunnels extensive, carved from salt deposits over decades of commercial operation. If someone wanted to hide something from advancing armies and strategic bombing, few places offered better protection than solid rock and salt, deep beneath the surface where even the heaviest ordnance could not reach. On April 7th, the orders came through. Enter the mine. Secure it. Determine what, if anything, the Germans had hidden in its depths. April 7th, 1945. The mine entrance at Merkus. Captain Howard McKinney stood at the portal, staring into the darkness that swallowed the narrow-gauge rails disappearing into the earth. Behind him, a squad of engineers examined the elevator mechanism, a cage of steel and cable that looked older than any man present. The machinery groaned as they tested it, the sound echoing up from depths that made even veteran soldiers pause. The elevator was designed for miners, not military operations. It could hold perhaps 8 men, crammed shoulder to shoulder, with barely enough headroom to stand upright. The cables were thick but showed their age, frayed strands visible in the afternoon light. An engineer traced the main support line with his finger, calculating weight limits and structural integrity against requirements that had nothing to do with salt extraction. They descended in shifts. McKinney went first, leading 4 engineers and 2 intelligence officers into the cage. The operator, a German civilian who had worked the mine for 30 years, threw the brake lever. The world dropped away. The descent took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of creeping movement through absolute darkness, the cage swaying slightly on its cables, the walls of the shaft passing invisibly just beyond arm's reach. The temperature dropped with each passing second. Spring warmth gave way to the perpetual chill of deep earth, a cold that had nothing to do with seasons or sunlight. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, the sound magnified by stone and emptiness. At 1,500 feet, the shaft walls changed character. Natural rock gave way to carved salt, crystalline surfaces that caught and scattered the faint light from the cage's single bulb. The air itself tasted different here, metallic and ancient, unchanged by the surface world's wars and chaos. 2,000 feet down, the elevator lurched to a stop. The gate opened onto a cavern carved from solid salt, its ceiling lost in shadows beyond the reach of their flashlights. Rails extended into tunnels that branched in multiple directions, each passage identical, each disappearing into darkness that swallowed their light beams within yards. The Germans had turned this commercial mine into a labyrinth, and somewhere in its depths, they had hidden something worth protecting with SS guards and sealed doors. McKinney's team moved through the main gallery, their boots crunching on salt crystals that had fallen from the ceiling over decades of mining. Side tunnels branched every 50 yards, some blocked by rockfall, others extending into darkness that suggested miles of passages. The maps they had been given showed the commercial extraction areas, but those maps were incomplete. New tunnels appeared that showed recent excavation, chambers that had been expanded beyond their original industrial purpose. They found the first sealed door 300 yards from the elevator shaft. It was not a mining door. Steel, reinforced, with fresh welds visible even in flashlight beams. Someone had installed it recently, cutting it to fit a passage that had been carved wider than standard mining tunnels. The door had no handle, no keyhole, just a smooth surface with weld marks where hinges had been attached on the opposite side. The engineers set shape charges. The explosion in the confined space was brutal, a percussion wave that hit like a physical blow even from a safe distance. When the smoke cleared, the door hung twisted on its hinges, revealing another passage, another sealed door 50 yards deeper into the mountain. They blew the second door, then a third. Each barrier revealed another layer of security, another passage leading deeper into sections of the mine that appeared on no commercial maps. The Germans had not simply hidden something here. They had created a vault within the earth itself, sealed behind multiple barriers, protected by depth and darkness and the assumption that no one would ever have reason to search this far beneath the surface. On April 8th, after 30 hours of penetrating deeper into the mine's secured sections, McKinney's team found the main vault. This door was different. Heavier. Set into a brick wall that had been constructed recently, the mortar still showing the pale color of incomplete curing. Behind this door, the Germans had placed whatever justified all the security, all the secrecy, all the effort to hide something 2,000 feet beneath a random German town. McKinney radioed to the surface. The message was brief, encrypted, marked for immediate delivery to 3rd Army headquarters. General Patton needed to see this himself, and he needed to see it before they opened that final door. April 12, 1945. George S. Patton arrived at Mercus with Lieutenant General Omar Bradley beside him in the jeep. The two men had commanded armies across North Africa, Sicily, France, and now deep into Germany itself. They had seen destruction on scales that defied comprehension, walked through cities reduced to rubble, witnessed the machinery of industrial war at its most terrible. But the message from the mine had pulled them away from the front lines, away from the final push toward Berlin, to see something that intelligence officers described only as unprecedented. The elevator cage groaned as it took their weight. Patton studied the cables, the ancient machinery, the dark shaft opening below. Bradley asked the German operator how long since the elevator had been inspected. The man's answer, translated hastily, did nothing to inspire confidence. This equipment was designed for moving miners and salt, not generals whose decisions shaped the fate of nations. The cage lurched downward anyway. The descent seemed longer when you understood the distance involved. 2,000 feet. Nearly half a mile of vertical drop through solid earth and salt, the weight of a mountain pressing in from all sides. Patton stood silent during the journey, his usual restlessness contained by the simple fact that there was nowhere to move, nothing to do but wait as the surface world disappeared overhead and the depths rose to meet them. The main gallery at the bottom stretched beyond the reach of installed lighting, a cavern carved from crystalline salt that caught and refracted light in strange ways. McKinney waited at the elevator, along with a full security detail and the engineering team that had spent days penetrating the mine's inner defenses. He led them through passages that showed increasing evidence of recent German activity. Fresh tool marks on the walls. Electric cables strung hastily along the ceiling. And everywhere, the sealed doors they had blown open to reach this depth. The final barrier stood at the end of a passage that had been widened significantly beyond standard mining dimensions. Someone had removed tons of salt to create a chamber large enough to hold something massive. The brick wall was new, constructed with precision that spoke of skilled masons working under pressure. The steel door set into it was the heaviest yet, its hinges massive, its surface showing none of the wear that marked the mine's older equipment. Engineers had already set the charges, waiting only for Patton's order to proceed. He walked to the door, placed his hand against the cold metal, then stepped back. Bradley joined him at the safe distance marked by the demolition team. The countdown was brief. The explosion, even muffled by preparation and distance, hit like a physical force in the enclosed space. Smoke filled the passage, acrid and choking. Flashlight beams cut through the haze, revealing the door twisted off its hinges, the brick wall breached, and beyond it, darkness that seemed to absorb their lights. The engineering team moved forward first, checking for structural damage, ensuring the explosion had not compromised the chamber beyond. Then they stepped aside. Patton entered first. His flashlight beams swept across the chamber and stopped. Bradley came through behind him, his own light adding to the illumination. For several seconds, neither man spoke. They simply stood, their lights playing across what the Germans had hidden 2,000 feet beneath the earth. Gold bars, stacked floor to ceiling along the chamber's left wall, each ingot stamped with a Reichsbank eagle and swastika. Not dozens of bars. Not hundreds. Thousands, stacked with Germanic precision in rows that extended back into the chamber's depths. The lights caught the metal and threw it back, a dull gleam that spoke of wealth beyond immediate comprehension. But the gold was only the beginning. The chamber extended further than their initial lights had revealed. More lights were brought forward. Military floodlights powered by generators dragged down from the surface. As the illumination increased, the full scope of what lay hidden in the Mercus mine became visible. Sacks lined the right wall, canvas bags stamped with bank markings from across occupied Europe. French francs, Belgian currency, Dutch guilders, Polish zloty, Norwegian krona. The monetary reserves of entire nations, stolen and stored in salt-preserved darkness. Some sacks had split, spilling paper currency across the stone floor in drifts that resembled autumn leaves. Crates stood stacked in the chamber's rear section. The engineering team pried one open. Paintings. Old masters, their frames carefully protected, their canvases preserved in the mine's stable temperature and low humidity. Another crate held sculptures. A third contained what appeared to be historical artifacts, items of cultural significance stripped from museums across the continent. Patton walked deeper into the chamber, his boots disturbing currency that had been hidden for months or years. He stopped at a smaller set of containers near the back wall. These were different. Sealed metal boxes, unmarked, heavy for their size. An engineer opened one carefully. Inside, wrapped in cloth, were dental fillings. Gold teeth. Hundreds of them. Thousands. Extracted from mouths that would never speak again, sorted by metal content, catalogued with the same efficiency that had marked every aspect of the Reich's operations. Bradley stood silent, staring at the small metal box and its contents. The implications were immediate and terrible. This was not just looted national wealth. This was evidence of something far darker, proof of crimes that extended beyond military conquest into systematic murder and theft on a scale that challenged belief. Patton turned to McKinney. His voice was steady, controlled, the tone of a commander issuing orders that would shape history. Contact General Eisenhower immediately. The Supreme Commander needed to see this. The world needed to see this. Every detail needed to be documented, photographed, catalogued with precision that would stand up to any future scrutiny. This chamber was no longer just a military discovery. It was evidence. Proof. A crime scene 2,000 feet underground that would reshape the understanding of what the Nazi regime had actually been. April 13, 1945. The mine at Mercus transformed into a scene of controlled chaos as teams of specialists descended into the depths. Military police secured every entrance to the vault chamber. Intelligence officers moved through the space with cameras, documenting every stack of gold, every sack of currency, every crate of stolen art. Accountants arrived from 3rd Army headquarters, men accustomed to tracking supply logistics and ammunition expenditures, now tasked with counting wealth that defied their standard methods of inventory. The gold alone required 2 days to catalogue properly. Each bar had to be examined, its markings recorded, its weight verified. The Reichsbank stamps were consistent, but not all the gold bore German markings. Some bars carried the seals of national banks from Belgium, the Netherlands, Austria, Czechoslovakia. The reserves of conquered nations, melted down and recast with swastikas, converted into fungible assets for a regime that had built its economy on plunder. The counting teams worked in shifts, their hands growing numb from handling cold metal in the chamber's perpetual chill. The numbers climbed beyond any initial estimates. 100 tons of gold. Then 200. Then more. When the final tally was complete, the vault held over 8,198 gold bars, along with hundreds of sacks of gold coins from across Europe. At wartime values, the total approached $238 million. In 1945 dollars. Wealth sufficient to fund entire armies, to rebuild nations, to shape the post-war world. But the currency presented different challenges. The sacks had been stored hastily, their contents mixed, bills from different nations thrown together as if their individual origins mattered less than simply getting them underground and hidden. French francs mingled with Belgian notes. Polish currency sat beside Dutch guilders. Some bills were new, crisp from recent printing. Others showed wear from circulation, the everyday currency of nations that no longer existed as independent entities. Intelligence officers recognized what they were seeing. This was not merely the German National Reserve. This was the systematic looting of every central bank, every treasury, every repository of national wealth that had fallen under Nazi occupation. When the Wehrmacht rolled into Paris, into Brussels, into Warsaw and Prague and Oslo, the SS had followed with very specific orders. Secure the banks. Strip the vaults. Convert national sovereignty into portable assets that could be moved, hidden, spent on the Reich's behalf. The art and cultural artifacts told a more personal story. The crates held paintings that museum curators would have recognized immediately. Works that had hung in private collections, in synagogues, in galleries across Europe. The Nazis had not limited their theft to national treasuries. They had moved through occupied territories with lists, targeting specific collections, specific families, specific cultural institutions. Jewish collections had been particularly targeted. Entire family legacies disappearing into the systematic machinery of appropriation and transport. One crate held illuminated manuscripts, their pages preserving medieval artistry that had survived centuries only to be stolen by men who saw them as commodities to be catalogued and stored. Another contained religious artifacts, silver menorahs, and Torah scrolls taken from synagogues across Eastern Europe. The SS had been thorough, methodical, treating cultural destruction as just another logistical challenge to be solved with German efficiency. But nothing prepared the cataloguing teams for the smallest containers. The metal boxes of dental gold multiplied as they searched deeper into the vault's recesses. Box after box, each filled with gold fillings, crowns, bridges. The evidence of mass murder, rendered down to its most terrible commercial efficiency. The Reich had not simply killed millions. It had extracted value from their bodies, sorting, and storing the gold with the same attention to detail that marked every other aspect of the operation. Other items emerged that spoke to the personal nature of the theft. Wedding rings, jewelry, watches, items that had been worn, carried, treasured by individuals whose names would never be known. The SS had processed entire populations through its machinery of death and appropriation, stripping bodies of anything valuable before disposal. The vault at Merkus represented the final destination of that process, the endpoint of a supply chain built on murder and theft on an industrial scale. The intelligence officers photographed everything. Their cameras captured the stacks of gold, the drifts of currency, the crates of art, and the terrible small boxes of dental fillings. Each photograph would become evidence, documentation that could not be dismissed or denied. The Reich had kept meticulous records of most of its operations, but here, hidden beneath the earth, was physical proof that transcended any paperwork. Engineers discovered additional chambers as they explored passages adjacent to the main vault. These held more conventional military supplies, ammunition, weapons, equipment stored for units that would never retrieve them. But they also found personal luggage, suitcases that had belonged to concentration camp prisoners, their contents sorted and stored with the same efficiency that marked everything else. Clothing, shoes, eyeglasses, the mundane possessions of ordinary people, catalogued and warehoused as if they were military supplies. By April 14th, the full scope of the Merkus discovery was becoming clear to the teams working underground. This was not simply a hidden treasury. It was a cross-section of Nazi criminality, a concentrated sample of everything the regime had done across a continent. The gold represented stolen national wealth. The currency showed systematic economic plunder. The art revealed cultural destruction. And the dental fillings, the jewelry, the personal possessions, these were evidence of genocide, rendered down to its most commercially efficient components. Patton ordered additional security. Military police ringed the mine entrance. Access was restricted to essential personnel only. Nothing could leave the vault without documentation, authorization, and armed escort. The chamber had become a crime scene that would shape war crimes tribunals and restitution efforts for generations. Every item needed to be preserved, tracked, eventually returned to its rightful owners or their surviving families. The question now was what to do with it all. How to move it. Where to secure it. And most importantly, how to ensure the world understood what had been found beneath a random German town, hidden in salt and darkness by men who had assumed their Reich would last 1,000 years. April 12, 1945. Supreme Commander Dwight D. Eisenhower received Patton's encrypted message while planning the final encirclement operations that would end the war in Europe. The message was brief, carefully worded to avoid specifics over radio channels that might still be monitored, but its urgency was unmistakable. Patton requested his immediate presence at Merkus. Not soon. Not when convenient. Immediately. Eisenhower understood Patton's nature well enough to know that the man did not interrupt strategic planning without cause. They had worked together through North Africa, through Sicily, through the nightmare of the Bulge. Patton did not exaggerate military significance. If he said the Supreme Commander needed to see something personally, then it was something that could not be adequately described in reports or communicated through normal channels. The flight from headquarters to the airfield nearest Merkus took less than 2 hours. A convoy of vehicles waited, engines running, security already in place. Eisenhower brought his chief of staff and several members of his intelligence staff. Whatever Patton had found, it would need to be assessed not just militarily but politically, with an understanding of how it would affect the occupation, the peace negotiations, and the reckoning that would follow the Reich's collapse. The mine entrance looked unremarkable from the surface. Just another industrial facility in a landscape dotted with factories and extraction operations. But the security presence told a different story. An entire company of military police had cordoned off the area. Armored vehicles blocked every approach road. This was no longer just a mine. It had become a fortress, protecting something that required the kind of security usually reserved for command headquarters or critical supply depots. Patton met him at the elevator cage. The two men had different command styles, different personalities, often different opinions on tactics and strategy. But they shared a mutual respect forged through years of war. Patton's expression was carefully neutral as he explained what lay below, but Eisenhower caught something in his tone. Not excitement. Not triumph. Something closer to grim certainty that what they were about to witness would change the nature of the occupation and the trials that would follow. The elevator descent gave Eisenhower time to consider the implications. If Patton had found significant military supplies, he would have simply reported it and moved on. If it were conventional treasure, hidden Nazi gold or artwork, that would be valuable but not unprecedented. The rumors of hidden Nazi wealth had circulated for months. But Patton's insistence on a personal visit suggested something beyond mere monetary value. Something that required the Supreme Commander's direct assessment and authority. The main gallery at the bottom stretched into darkness that the installed lights could not fully penetrate. The temperature dropped noticeably, the spring warmth of the surface world replaced by the unchanging cold of deep earth. Patton led the way through passages that showed recent military activity, past the blown doors, past the security checkpoints, to the chamber that had been hidden behind brick and steel. The floodlights were already in place when Eisenhower entered. The chamber was fully illuminated, every corner visible, every stack of gold bars casting sharp shadows across the salt floor. For several long moments, the Supreme Commander simply stood, absorbing what his eyes reported but his mind struggled to fully process. He had commanded millions of men, coordinated the largest amphibious invasion in history, made decisions that cost thousands of lives in service of strategic objectives. But this was different. This was not the calculus of military operations. This was evidence of systematic criminality on a scale that defied peacetime understanding. He walked to the stacks of gold bars first. Not because they were the most significant discovery, but because they were the most immediately comprehensible. Gold was wealth, tangible and measurable. Each bar represented value that could be calculated, tracked, eventually returned, or redistributed. His hand touched the cold metal, feeling the weight of a single ingot. Then he turned to survey the totality. Hundreds of tons. The reserves of multiple nations, stolen and consolidated. The currency sacks drew his attention next. Eisenhower had studied the economics of occupation during his planning for post-war Germany. He understood that the Nazis had financed their war machine partly through systematic theft, but seeing the physical evidence was different from reading intelligence reports. Here were the actual francs, guilders, krone, the working currency of occupied nations, stripped from banks and citizens, converted into German purchasing power or simply hoarded against the day when the Reich would need to rebuild or escape. But the crates of art and cultural artifacts represented something beyond economic theft. These were not strategic materials or military supplies. These were items of cultural significance, beauty, historical importance. Someone had made deliberate choices about what to steal, what to preserve, what to hide. The selection revealed priorities that went beyond mere survival or military necessity. The Reich had been building a collection, appropriating the cultural heritage of entire civilizations. Intelligence officers showed him the smaller containers, the dental gold, the jewelry, the personal possessions. Eisenhower's expression hardened as he examined the contents. He had received reports from liberated concentration camps. He had seen photographs that his staff had thought too disturbing for wide distribution. But photographs were abstractions, images on paper that could be intellectually understood while maintaining emotional distance. These items were different. These were physical objects that had been part of human bodies, extracted and processed with industrial efficiency. He turned to Patton and Bradley, his voice carrying the weight of command decisions that would extend far beyond military operations. This discovery needed to be documented with absolute precision. Every item catalogued, every photograph preserved, every piece of evidence secured against any future claim that the discoveries were exaggerated or fabricated. The world would need to see this, not through written reports or verbal testimony, but through direct confrontation with physical evidence. Eisenhower made several immediate decisions. First, the press would be invited to the mine. Journalists from Allied nations would be brought underground, allowed to photograph, allowed to witness and report. The discovery was too significant to be kept classified or restricted to military channels. Second, German civilians from nearby towns would be brought to see what had been hidden beneath their communities. They would witness what their government had done, what their silence had protected. Third, everything in the vault would be moved to secure facilities under American control, but the movement would be documented at every stage. Chain of custody would be absolute. The implications extended beyond immediate war crimes evidence. This wealth would need to be returned to its rightful owners, to the nations it had been stolen from, to the surviving families of those who had been murdered for their possessions. The legal and diplomatic challenges would be enormous, requiring years of investigation and adjudication. But the alternative, allowing this evidence to disappear or be inadequately documented, was unacceptable. As Eisenhower prepared to return to the surface, he paused at the chamber entrance, looking back at the stacks of gold and the smaller containers that held their terrible evidence. The war in Europe was nearly over. Germany's military capacity was shattered beyond recovery. But the reckoning was just beginning. What lay hidden in the Merkus mine would shape that reckoning, would provide undeniable proof that the Nazi regime had been built not just on military conquest but on systematic theft and murder on a continental scale. The elevator carried him back toward the surface, toward the spring sunlight and the final operations that would end the shooting war. But the implications of what he had seen would extend far beyond military victory. The vault at Merkus had transformed from a military discovery into evidence that would reshape international law, restitution efforts, and the historical understanding of what the Second World War had actually been.